what COP21 and COP25 are focused on. So very quickly, I will look at global environmental problems. I will look at the drivers. I will talk about some of the evidence that we have, because we still have some people that do not believe that climate change is real. They think that the Earth is just revolving and we are now very close to the sun, and at some point it will be colder, the same way it's hotter. They don't believe in the evidence that we are showing that climate change is real. And then we'll look at how science diplomacy can help, and then what strategies and plans we need to put in place in our individual country level to be able to use or effectively use science diplomacy to address problems of climate change. Science diplomacy, it takes different forms. Sometimes it takes 3 forms, like Dr. Victor mentioned. Other times it takes about 4 forms. But majorly, science diplomacy is used by some school of thought to inform foreign policy objectives, and that is with scientific advice. So science or evidence from science is used to inform foreign policy. And when we have scientific advice informing foreign policy, we say that is science in diplomacy. And then other times we have facilitating international science cooperation. So when we are trying to facilitate international science cooperation, we say that's diplomacy for science. And then when we use science cooperation to improve international relations between countries, we say that's science for diplomacy. And so you need to identify the school of thought that you belong to. So countries engage in science diplomacy to access, to promote, to share knowledge, to engage in cooperation, to influence public opinion, and also to make sure that they have an effective bilateral relationship with different countries. So the world is now a global village. It's no longer when people stay in their country and they are isolated from other countries. Where we are now, the world is now a global village. So what affects one country also affects the other. But some of the challenges that we are having, even as the world is a global village, have local impacts. They have global impacts, but some of the local challenges are severe in some places. And as we go on, we'll look at some of the case studies where people are really feeling the impact of climate problem within their own space compared to other countries. So, but what science diplomacy is not is when we try to use politics to discredit scientific knowledge. That is not science diplomacy. That is not science for diplomacy. And that is not diplomacy in science. Because a number of countries, particularly developed countries, they want to use politics to discredit scientific knowledge. And that is not at all anything close to science diplomacy. So it is actually a well-intentioned field where policy practitioners, science policy practitioners can interrelate with politicians to ensure that we have an effective relationship between 2 countries. So if you want to give a particular definition to it, it's going to depend on the school of thought that you belong to, but majorly in a very broad sense. Science diplomacy involves the use of scientific evidence to facilitate collaborations among countries, to address common problems, okay, and to build constructive partnership. That is very, very important. So it is intricately blending of science and diplomatic processes. So problems such as climate change and even the COVID-19 that we are experiencing now, and even the talks about nuclear weapon are problems that we can use science diplomacy to solve. And so let's look at some of the global environmental problems that we have. It's no longer news that we have global warming, we have the ozone depleting, we have sharp decrease of forest cover, we have declining biological diversity, we have acid rain and pollution, particularly in countries that are dependent on natural resources. We have land desertification, we have marine pollution and damage, we have toxic chemical pollution. And these are just a handful. There are much more environmental problems that are affecting different countries. So what are the drivers for these environmental problems? The drivers are majorly economic systems, our economic systems. We prioritize opportunities for economic benefit beyond environmental management. And those kind of traditional economic development pattern affect environmental management, effective and efficient environmental management. Another driver why we are having more environmental problem is the upsurge in population in a number of the continent. Okay, we have upsurge in our population, and the more we have people living, the more pressure on natural resources, and the more pressure on natural resources, the more the environment suffers for it. And then we have some cultural tradition as well, particularly in this era where some countries are doing individualism. People want just to benefit their own country. There is some, in short, we have some countries that do not want foreigners to be in their midst. They want people to go back to their own country and develop their own resources for their population. That is also a problem. And then we have the bad side or the negative side of science and technology that has been the root cause of many environmental problems that we have. For example, some African countries are now becoming the depot for electronic waste from the advanced countries. And science and technology in that sense is contributing to environmental problems in those countries. And then we also have the continuous dependence on fossil fuels. We know and we are aware that a number of countries are now developing their renewable energy, but there are still countries, in short, research has shown that in the next 50 years, we will continue to be dependent on fossil fuels. And so exploring and production of fossil fuels is one of the factors that are contributing to environmental problems. So of all the environmental problems that I have identified, I'm just going to look at climate change, okay, because time will not permit me to look at all the problems. So this is something that is common, and this is something that is on the front burner of almost all the countries. So let's look at how we can use science diplomacy to solve the problem of climate change. So climate change is not anything that is new. It has been happening even before this century, but it has come to prominence in this century because we are now seeing the impacts. We are now seeing the evidence that actually our climate is changing. So when we are talking about climate change, we are talking about an increase in the Earth's average temperature. The temperature is increasing, and we'll look at why is our temperature increasing. So climate change is something that has local impacts, and different countries suffer from it in different ways. There are different evidence across countries. What Nigeria is suffering is different from what Rwanda is suffering in terms of the impacts or the evidence of climate change. But let's just understand how this works. So we have what we call greenhouse gases on the surface of the Earth. And these greenhouse gases is what sustains the temperature that supports life on Earth. So the different activities of human beings contribute greenhouse gases, which increase the amount of energy that is being trapped on the surface of the Earth. And those gases, as a number of us will already know, are gases like carbon dioxide, gases like methane, gases like nitrous oxide. So the more we are engaged in activities that release carbon dioxide, that release methane, that release nitrous oxide and water droplets into the atmosphere, the more heat or the more energy that is being trapped on the surface. And the more heat that is being trapped on the surface, the hotter the environment or the surface of the Earth becomes, which is what is increasing the temperature. So from my slide, you see the space of the atmosphere when we are talking about natural greenhouse effects, just to describe to us what is happening with global warming and climate change. But if you look at the second part of the picture, everywhere is almost orange, showing a saturation of carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide because of anthropogenic activities that man is involved in. And so the more greenhouse gases that are being trapped on the surface, the more evaporation is happening. And the more evaporation that is happening, the stronger winds that we have, the more precipitation in some places, and then more drought and wildfires in other places. And the more evaporation also, we are having changing conditions for plants and animals. And then you also find that the ice are melting and even the snow are melting as well. So this describes the different climate connections between greenhouse gases, which is driven by anthropogenic activities. So the climate is changing, and as the climate is changing, temperatures are rising, sea levels are rising, the ocean is becoming very acidic, biodiversity is being impacted, organisms are shifting from their natural habitats to other environments, and then we are having recurrent floods, we are having food insecurity, we are having tsunamis and volcanoes. So how can we use the tool of science diplomacy to help all of this? It is important to show this picture to show, just to indicate to us the upsurge in temperature level. And reports have shown that 1998 was the hottest year, or the warmest, rather, I think that's the right word, was the warmest year that we have had on Earth. But that was in the last 10 decades. We don't know what we are looking forward to, because instead of the temperature dropping, we have seen an increase, a continuous or a steady increase in temperature. And again, the evidence to show that climate is changing. If you look at the Potage Glacier, you see that in 1914, we had a heap of the Potage Glacier. But a picture taken in 2004 indicated that the glacier has melted substantially, resulting to more water in the ocean. And then another evidence we have is in Nigeria. A number of states in Nigeria are being flooded, houses are being submerged, even two-story buildings are being submerged. And places that in the last 50 years, in short, in the last century, we are not experiencing flooding, they are now experiencing flooding. So what are the drivers? There are natural drivers and there are man-made drivers, okay? What role are human beings playing? So most of the climate change experience in the current era is as a result of human activities. Like I mentioned before, a number of countries are solely dependent on fossil fuels. And the process of mining fossil fuels, the process of burning fossil fuels contributes substantial amount of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And for all those places as well, deforestation has been experienced and also reported. And also, we now have a surge in artisanal mining of natural resources that has also destroyed a whole large landscape of mangroves. And mangroves, science has shown that they absorb more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere than the ordinary tropical forest trees that we have. So man-made activities are contributing to greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And these greenhouse gases continue to trap heat on the surface of the earth that makes it warmer. And so what is contributing to this as well is our approach to agriculture, particularly in Nigeria. Over 80% of agricultural activities are very traditional and not commercial. And so they are also driven by fossil fuels. Okay, so our water management practices as well, our energy sources and use, our transportation, and a whole lot of pollution that we experience, taking Nigeria as an example now, is one of the things that is contributing to global warming. And if you look at the ranking of countries flaying gas, Nigeria and Russia have been taking turns as first and second for successive years. So you see that both developed and developing countries, if you look at it from that perspective, are contributing to the issue of greenhouse gases. So climate change has, beyond the flooding and those impacts that I've mentioned, we have human health impacts, we have ecosystem impacts, we have agricultural impacts, we have water resources impacts, we also have market and socioeconomic impacts. Um, so what are we doing majorly? We either mitigate or we adapt to climate change. So those are the two solutions that we have to address climate change. So when we take action to limit the magnitude or the rate of long-term climate change, we say that is mitigation. So what we are doing in that sense when we mitigate is to reduce human activities that contribute to greenhouse gases. And then the second thing we do is adaptation. And adaptation is a main response to climate change just to reduce the vulnerability of social and biological systems, okay, to the impacts. And an example of that is when we redesign our building codes and when we do urban planning and ensure that we use efficient energy systems or renewable energies. So what an integrated approach can be is to look at the socioeconomic development paths for different countries, okay? And then look at the emissions and concentrations, the offsets. Who are the countries contributing so much? Where can we focus help? Where can we focus adaptation? Where can we focus mitigation? That sort of integrated framework is needed for us to contribute effectively to the fight against climate change. So for us at individual levels, we advise that you walk more or you use your bike instead of driving a car. Because when you drive a car, you contribute to the emission. So you use energy efficient bulbs instead of the bulbs that you suck too much energy. You reduce heating and air conditioning in your homes. You use carpools instead of everybody owning a car. Can we use a bus instead? Okay, instead of everybody driving their individual cars. You buy local and seasonal produce. You put a lid on your vessel when you are cooking. It's very simple, but not everybody practice that. So there are a number of strategies that we can adopt. And this is my lovely picture to show some of the practices that we do that contributes to global warming and also exacerbate climate change. So for example, can we eat more of fish than eating more of meat? Okay, instead of eating cow meat, which is beef, can we eat more of goat meat? Can we eat more of fresh food? Okay, can we walk more, use our bike than using devices that contribute to global warming? I'm going to rush now. So what are the efforts so far by science diplomacy? We had the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change that had about 190 parties signing to it. Majorly what is being done is how countries can support each other via finances, via capacity building, via technology. Okay, that has been rolling out a number of reports that have been helping countries to adapt their nationally determined contributions on emission. So that was one of the collaborations based on scientific advice that is helping, but it is not adequate. So in 1997, like Dr. Victor has mentioned, we have the Kyoto Protocol, where we had about 175 parties also signing to that. And the major goal was to reduce emissions by 5%. And then we had the Paris Agreement, where we want to reduce temperature by 2 degrees centigrade by 2050, and also helping countries to develop capacity in how they can develop their own nationally determined contributions. And then we also have the Sustainable Development Goal, which we are hoping will change a lot of about 17 goals by 2030. So how can science diplomacy help to address global environmental issues? We require member states to initiate implementation plans. So it's not enough to be a signatory to these treaties, okay? You need to get back home and develop your own plan, okay, on how you want to achieve that. Most countries just sign and they go back home to sit down. And then we need to monitor the implementation plan and assess milestones. We need to support developing countries to address dependence on fossil fuels. Because if Nigeria, for example, continue to depend on crude oil, and we have the US, we have all the countries in Europe that are using renewable energy, Nigeria will still have an impact on those countries. So we need to support each other and to move away collectively from fossil fuels. We need also to initiate serious plan to shift from fossil fuel to renewable energy. We need to tackle contextual mitigation and adaptation measures because it is necessary to help communities that are already vulnerable to be able to adapt to climate change. So in summary, we can use science diplomacy to control rising carbon dioxide levels and global warming, okay? And climate change is real for those that do not believe, and the impacts will devastate humanity. We are all admonished to contribute to reducing the impact of climate change on humanity. And so what you need to do is just for you to be climate friendly. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, dear doctor, for your very informative lecture. And yes, you are right. We have to take care about our environment and keep it for sustainable development goal in 2030. So we are behind our time by 37 minutes. So I will take the question for this lecture in the open discussion session. So I would like to